everyone, I've got another snow scene today. We're going to do a bit more pen in wash because everybody said how much they liked it. So it's a quite simple sketch. We've got a person in here and a little dog as well, just to make it a bit more fun. So you want, but it's about half and half. You've got the mountains here, this is Scotland, and then this hillside here. Then if you bring it down and just follow your perspective, look to where it's going at the edge of the paper so that you can get this path line in, and then a few bits of where the shrubbery is. There's not a huge amount of drawing. And then I want you to focus on the figure. You can look where it's placed in the landscape. It can be placed slightly differently. I've gone slightly smaller with the figure because I think it gives a nice sense of scale. So start with the head, make sure you've got that in nicely, and then work your way down. So you can have the jacket, and then the legs, and then the little dog. I've just started with the back end of the dog and then just popped a little head. There's not a huge amount of detail in there. It just makes it a little bit more interesting for the landscape. Colours wise, let's try and check. You can see these here. Similar colours to last week. In fact, I've not even washed my palette. So we've got Naples yellow, permanent rose, cobalt blue. I've got a little bit of dioxazine purple. If you haven't got that, you can just use a mixture of permanent rose and cobalt blue. That will be fine. You might have some of that left on your palette from last week. I've got a tiny bit of cerulean blue. That's not essential. If you haven't got that, you can just use lighter cobalt as you come down in the sky. That's going in the sky. I've got a grey which is made with cobalt blue and burnt sienna, and then a green which is made with gamboge hue and cobalt blue. Okay, I've also got some sepia ink ready, and my trusty knitting needle, and I've got my sepia drawing pen which is waterproof. Okay, so first of all we're going to get a wash on the sky and the snow. So you can wet the whole paper. This is all about just getting that nice glow. On the snow at the bottom, and then a really nice sky in at the top. We've still got a little bit of snow here. I think it will go today though. I think this will be our last cold day. Okay, so make sure your brush is nice and clean. I've got my round number 10, and I'm going to start with the Naples yellow. It doesn't matter if it flows further, so I don't want you to panic. If it goes down over the hillside, don't worry, it's absolutely fine. Take a little bit through. We're doing both at the same time, so I'm going to make sure it comes onto the hillside this side because I can see some really nice light in the photograph. Then I'm coming into my permanent rose. And pop a bit of that on the snow. I'm doing the snow first because I'm waiting for the sky just to dry off a little bit before I come in with the rose, because I don't want it to flow too much. Just bring in a little bit of the rose. I'm going to bring a little bit of the rose in towards the top as well. It just adds a bit of interest in the sky. And then I'm a dab into the cerulean blue. And this is coming in just above the Naples yellow. Now cerulean blue is semi-opaque, so it shouldn't run too much into the Naples yellow, so you should find you're okay if you're using that. If you're using the cobalt blue, a watered down version, then just make sure you don't come too close to the Naples yellow. And I'm going to come into the cobalt blue and bring this onto the sky. So try and sweep the colour in so you get a little bit more interest, not too flat. You can leave an odd white patch if you want for a wispy cloud, or you can come over the whole lot, it doesn't matter. And then we're just really focusing on cool shadow, and it's soft shadow at the moment at the bottom. So we're not too concerned about the harder shadows. So just make sure when you're coming on that it's not too prominent. You don't want it to be striped too blue. If it started to dry in places just a little bit, just dab a little bit more water on. This bottom section started to dry. It won't matter. What you'll find is there's quite a lot of blue shadow in here. Because of the way the light's hitting, the light's coming on this mountain at the back, so this is going to be quite a lot bluer than you think. Just be careful you don't, if your Naples yellow is really light, you'll find that the blue just goes over anyway and it doesn't go green, but you don't really want green in here. If it goes green, then the way to rectify it is to just pop a bit more rose in, and then it'll look more grey. Okay, so I'm going to dry this off now. Okay, so that's dried really well now. I just want to bring out these clouds a little bit more in the background. They're quite light. So what I've done is you either want cobalt or your cerulean blue. You want your brush loaded, your round number 10, and you want your soft wash brush at the ready. I'm just going to bring in, this is going to look pretty scary, a line just to start to define that edge a little bit more. Make sure you've got plenty of clean water as well, and then just bring that along, and then I'm just going to touch in with my wash brush that side, clean my wash brush, and then just touch in places. So I'm not concerned if I miss a few bits, because that's going to work really nicely. I just wanted to bring an edge, a better edge in where this cloud is. So you can just take a little bit more paint in. You want it to feel soft, you can have a few hard edges. Just make sure you've dried it really well, and then you can go back in with the hairdryer after. Okay, I'm just going to dry that off. Okay, so that's dried really well. I'm going to come into this distant hillside first. So I'm wetting the whole of this very distant one. And then I've got my round number 6. What we've got to be careful of here is that we don't lose the areas of snow. So I'm going to come in first of all with a little bit of cobalt blue. Just along this top edge. And then just sweep down. If in doubt, leave a bigger area where the white is, so you don't lose it. You want to try and keep as much of that light as you can. My brush a bit of a rinse, and I'm going to come into the grey. And I'm just starting to bring that on. Again, we're starting towards the top. Using the same colours from the sky first of all always introduces a sense of distance, which we want. And then I'm picking up a little bit of my green, just bringing that in, not too much, more in this area that's closer here. Got my ink. You can either blob a bit on your palette, or you can use it straight out of the bottle if you want. You don't want a huge amount to go on at this point, so if you haven't got the ink, you could just use a bit of sepia. This is just to start to create the shrubbery. If you're going in damp, it'll just start to blend and give that effect. If it starts to dry a little bit, don't panic. You can have odd bits that are drier anyway. It will still work. This is all distance. And just try to simplify it just that little bit. So bringing it in over the green. I'm just gonna dampen this bit in, so this is just a wet brush. If you get a little bit of tissue, if some of the colours spread a bit too much, I'm just going to just lift. I'm not touching the ink because the ink won't lift, but I'm just lifting a little bit of the watercolour just so that I get that white, that dash of white on the snow. Some of it's gone a bit mucky looking, and I don't want the mucky looking effect on all of it. Do you remember last week I said you could dab snow? You can get away with it. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so we're going to come over this side now and just get this background bit on, and then we'll be coming in with a bit of ink after that. So I'm going to wet this distant hill. I'm going to come over the snowy path and just a little bit further, so it's tapering off. You'll see when I get the colour on where I've gone to. So I'm going to come on with a bit of rose first. It'll just help you to see where I'm going to. I'm using my round number 10, but you could use your round number 6 as well. Okay, so this is a little bit of the green. So I want to get that overlap, that sense of distance there. But this is all more foliage that I want to do later, so it's just this section that I'm trying to capture now. And then I'm coming into the sepia ink again. And this bit's quite dark. It's the darkest bit really on the picture. So I'm just applying and letting it flow down, but I don't really want it to flow all the way to the bottom. So there's still glimpses of light in there from the colours underneath. Okay, rinse my brush really well, nice clean water. I'm just going to make sure that I haven't got hard edges at the bottom, so I'm just touching the paint and wetting further just to make sure I haven't got any huge hard edges. Again, you can grab that little bit of your kitchen towel, just dab, just to create that section of snow. Just going to stop that flowing as well, just dab that a little bit at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so what we've got now is a really nice background in watercolour. By doing it this way and not going in with the ink until now, it means you're putting less pen on there, and you're letting the watercolour do its thing as well. It's very tempting when you've got a white sheet of paper to put a lot of pen work in, and you don't need it. So I'm going to start to come in and do little wriggly bits in this background. So I'm going to start to define, I'm defining these little bits here. So what I want you to do is do a few of these, and I want to give you basically 2 minutes. Just do a load of wriggly bits and a bit on the figure, and then we're going to pop some more paint on and some ink. If you're not careful, it can become too detailed. So it's that balance. It's really hard to explain, but the less you think about it and the more you look at it as pattern and texture, the easier it becomes. So I'm just coming down the figure. I'm looking at the darks really. I'm trying to pull those out a little bit. I don't want to outline everything on the figure. So these are the gloves. Can you see how I've gone down one side of the kept it to one side underneath. So I'm pulling out the dark areas more. Concentrating on that tonal value. These legs are in a... Yeah, so concentrate on getting those tonal, those dark sides in. So don't just outline the figure, concentrate on getting the dark areas in. And the same applies for the dog, so I'm going to come this side, just underneath. I'm just going to give him a little tail, and then I can come in and do his head at the back. So I haven't gone all the way around with an outline. I've come slightly underneath this side, and then I've given the tail an outline, but then the head. So you're getting just the dark areas. Come in and pop a few of these bits in. Just come back a bit. So I've just started to pop in a few grassy bits. You want to start to pop in a few wispy tree branches. beauty of this is this won't move because it's waterproof, so you can come over this with the ink and the paint later. So I'm going to come in and start to create the wispiness on this shrub here. It's one of those things that always feels so much easier than when you're trying to paint it. So little bits, we're going to come in with some ink in a minute. Okay, so I've got my green, I've got my sepia ink, I've got my pen, I've got my trusty knitting needle. If you haven't got a knitting needle, a bamboo stick, a cocktail stick, anything like that will do for adding a little bit of ink on with line way, and then we're going to use the brush as well. So I'm going to come in first of all and just concentrate on this section. It's all an element of artistic license here, so don't panic if it doesn't look exact. I'm just going to start to get this effect of the snow and the shrubbery in the background. So I'm going to bring a little bit of this is just the green paint over this area. And this is on to dry, but I'm using quite a lot. I've loaded my brush. And then I'm going to dip into the sepia ink and just let it flow in this watercolour. So you have a nice mixture of both happening now. It's important to do little sections so you've got the capacity to let it flow. If I pick up my knitting needle, I can probably make a lot of it just by making the marks and letting it flow through, but I can also dip in, I can scroll back, dip back in. So you should start to get some really nice fluid effects. You might find that the knitting needle dips better by dipping it into the pot because there's more on there for you to flow. And when we did pen and wash a couple of weeks ago, you can move the ink whilst it's still wet, so you can get the best of both worlds. You can get that fluid effect as well. So if there's any way we want to flow it, say maybe I want to touch it a little bit here, I can bring a bit more dark in here. So this is now giving you the best of both worlds. You get that nice thick line. You can come in with a wet brush and just flow it a little bit. I'm going to come over this side. So So just concentrate on getting the ink on where there might be some darker areas, and then you can leave it as marks, or you can wet it a little bit and move it around. So around number 6, I'm just going to wet a couple of places. You've got to be quite reserved about it because you don't want your snow to look too grubby. So it's a good one for you to try in that respect. What you want is that sense of it going off into the distance. Make a little bit more of this here. Just going to pull that just out a little bit. So I think it's giving a sense of the path. It's also leading the eye that way. You can dry off at any point you want to dry off. And keep pausing and stepping back and checking where you're going with stuff. I'm just going to bring a little bit more of the green in and do a little bit more ink work. I'm fairly quick, so I can do this and then go on and dab the inks on fairly quick. You don't have to do this much in one go, so don't panic. You can come in bit by bit. Concentrate on getting that darker ink where it needs to go in the darker sections. Be careful where you're putting your fingers as well. I've just dabbed into the ink the other side. Probably one of the reasons you should be drying off. So just dabbing in with my knitting needle, just creating some fluid effects. And then into the ink. Again, not too precise. And then you can soften in some of these areas if you want. Just a few little dabs. Some little bits of foliage still. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off now. Okay, so that's dried really well now. I'm going to start to come in and just with the dioxazine purple, or a mixture of cobalt blue and permanent rose. I'm going to start to create some of this darker shadow that we're seeing on the snow. You don't want it to be too strong. So this is a sharper shadow that you can see now, like the footprints. You take a little bit on here, so I'm just using my round number 10, you can just soften that in a little bit. It doesn't have to be harsh everywhere. Bring a little bit down here. If you sort of, where you've got a big area like this, if you can sort of miss a few bits and leave them dry, that works quite nicely. There's a lot of shadow in here. So here we've got sort of a humpiness happening. So I'm arching the brush over. Quite smooth. Take a little bit down here. Doesn't matter if you come over the figure. And then just bring it that way. I'm going to avoid the dog though, so I want that to be a little bit lighter. Come round the dog. Bit of shadow this way. Capture those sort of footprints in the snow. So you basically want a lot of purple shadow in here at the bottom, but you just don't want it to be too strong. And then you're going to dry it off really well. Okay, so that's dried really well. I'm going to bring a little bit of purple shadow just down there, just because I want this to shine out more. So what I'm just trying to do is knock these areas back a little bit that are a bit whiter. An odd bit of white's fine, but I want that area to glow. So to make that area glow, I've got to have enough shadow to do that. And then I want to come back in and get those dark. If you squint at the snow, you'll see the darker shadows, and they're like a double layer. So it's mainly where the footprints are. So you can come back through these and just, doesn't have to be too precise. Create an extra bit of shadow in that section. Under the dog, a little bit. Just ground the figures and the dog as well. You can have a little bit along here. Just have a little sort of squint and see if you can see any more really dark bits of shadow. Just helps to just pull them out, just taking that second layer there on the snow. Just soften that one in a bit. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off now. Okay, so I've dried that off now. I'm going to pop in a couple of little bits on the dog. So the first thing is I'm going to just pop a bit of Naples yellow. If you haven't got Naples yellow, raw sienna will do, just on the bum of the dog. And then I'm going to use my grey. I'm trying not to introduce more colours. You could, if you really wanted the figure to stand out now, introduce more colour. Any colour added in at this stage would just mean that it just stood out really well. So I'm using the grey. So I've used the grey on the hat and on the legs. I'll use a little bit on the bottom of the sole of the shoe, and then I'm going to come in with a little bit of cobalt blue for the jacket, and I'm going to use that pretty much neat. It doesn't run too far. What you might find is that they blend together a little bit, the grey, and I don't tend to mind that too much. I quite like that effect, but if you don't, then just dry them off in between. Okay, that's pretty much it. So it's a nice pen and wash watercolour of snow. Okay, I'll see you next week.